Beneath the sands of time lie stories that continue to shape who we are today, from the blazing deserts of ancient Egypt to the towering skyline of modern Manhattan. Humanity's journey is one of resilience, innovation, and belief. Each civilization, each era, tells us not only how people lived, but also how they dreamed, worshipped, and fought to leave their mark on the world. And tonight, we will embark on a journey across centuries, uncovering how life was endured, celebrated, and transformed through rituals, rhythms, and monuments that still speak to us. Imagine standing in ancient Egypt thousands of years ago. The sun, relentless and divine, dominated every part of existence. Families survived inside reed huts with little protection from the heat, and meals were simple coarse bread and beer that kept workers fueled through long days of back-breaking labor. Life was short, often ending before the age of 35. But the people found meaning in the balance of mat, in rituals to honor their gods, and in the promise of an afterlife more beautiful than the world they knew. Even medicine was a blend of herbs and charms, showing us how spiritual belief was deeply interwoven with survival itself. Far across the ocean, in the ancient city of Teotihuacan, people looked to the stars to guide their civilization. Their temples were not only feats of engineering, but also cosmic machines aligned with the heavens. Rituals, some involving offerings of the most sacred kind, were believed to maintain the harmony of the universe. Every stone, every carving, was filled with meaning, and although they left no written records, their city still whispers a message about humanity's eternal search for connection with something greater than ourselves. But it was not only temples and tombs that carried meaning. Rhythm itself became humanity's heartbeat. Before words, there were drumbeats echoing through rituals, battles, and celebrations. From Africa to Mesopotamia, from Japan to the Americas, the drum became a language of unity, a way to call the spirits, to gather the community, and to inspire courage. Even now, jazz clubs, rock concerts, and digital soundscapes, that primal rhythm is alive within us. And then, centuries later, in the heart of Manhattan, humans once again showed their power to shape the world. Skyscrapers rose into the clouds, defying gravity and time. From the first steel frames to the Empire State Building and beyond, the race toward the sky told a story of ambition, innovation, and resilience. Even after tragedy shook the skyline, New York rebuilt, turning sorrow into strength, and proving once more that humanity's story is one of rising, falling, and rising again. Through these stories, across lands and centuries, we will uncover the remarkable ways people endured, adapted, and created meaning. If you enjoy diving into these mysteries of history and culture, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss the journeys we will take together. Because history is not just the past, it is the mirror of who we are. The story of ancient Egypt cannot be told without first understanding the force that dominated every moment of existence. The sun, in the Nile Valley, where fertile land was hemmed in by vast deserts. The blazing sun was not merely a part of the landscape. It was life itself, feared and revered, a power so immense that people shaped their homes, their work, and even their beliefs around its presence. To the Egyptians, the sun was more than heat and light, it was the divine, embodied in the god Ra, who sailed across the sky each day and descended into the underworld each night. To live under the Egyptian sun was to exist under the constant gaze of the gods. Imagine waking at dawn in a small mud brick house, its walls thick but still unable to keep out the rising warmth. Families slept on simple reed mats. And as the first rays of the sun entered through small slits in the wall, the day began not with comfort, but with endurance. The heat would intensify steadily, reaching its peak by midday, and so life had to adapt. Work was done early in the morning or late in the afternoon, while the harshest hours were reserved for rest. Yet even in the shade, the air shimmered, and the body never fully escaped the weight of the climate. Farmers bent their backs in the fields, guided by the rhythms of the Nile, but always under the blazing sky. They wore simple linen garments, lightweight and white, designed not for fashion but for survival, allowing the skin to breathe in the relentless heat. They covered their heads with cloth, sometimes dampened with water, a small relief that quickly evaporated in the desert air. Toiling in the fields meant more than growing crops. It was a daily battle against exhaustion, sunburn, and thirst. The sun fed the land but also tested the limits of human endurance. Food was simple but sustaining. Coarse bread, made from emmer wheat or barley, was baked daily in clay ovens, and beer brewed from the same grains became the staple drink for workers. Beer was not a luxury but a necessity, providing hydration and calories in an environment where clean water was often scarce. Dates, onions, and lentils added variety, but the diet reflected the harsh truth. Survival in Egypt was about practicality, not indulgence. Every meal was part of a larger cycle of labor, rest, and ritual that kept the community alive beneath the sun. Yet the Egyptians did not see the sun only as an enemy. They revered it, believing that the same light that burned their skin also carried the promise of eternal life. Ra's journey across the heavens was mirrored in their own hopes that after the hardships of earthly life, the soul would rise into the afterlife, renewed and protected by divine power. Temples were aligned with the rising and setting sun, built not just as monuments of stone, but as spiritual calendars that tied human existence to cosmic order. Each sunrise was a gift, each sunset a reminder of mortality and rebirth. Medicine, too, reflected this dual relationship with the sun. People used natural remedies, herbs, honey, garlic, and oils to soothe the burns and fevers brought on by exposure. At the same time, incantations and charms were whispered alongside treatments, blending science with belief, as if healing required both the knowledge of herbs and the favor of the gods. This combination reveals a truth about ancient survival. It was never just about the body, but also the spirit. To endure the heat was to endure with faith. Children learned from an early age how to live with the climate. They played by the river, their bodies smeared with protective oils to shield against the harsh rays. And they grew up with the understanding that the sun was not to be underestimated. It was a teacher, shaping their habits, their schedules, and their very concept of time. Unlike in cooler regions, the passing hours were not measured by mechanical devices, but by the arc of the sun in the sky. Life itself was a clock wound by light. And so, beneath the endless Egyptian sun, people carved out their lives with resilience. They built homes designed to cool, developed rituals to honor the divine fire above, and accepted hardship as part of a greater cosmic balance. The sun gave and the sun took, but it never allowed them to forget who held power. To survive in ancient Egypt was not simply to endure the heat, it was to live within a sacred relationship with the most dominant force of nature, a relationship of struggle, respect, and awe. This delicate balance between survival and spirituality explains why Egyptian civilization flourished for thousands of years. They understood that the sun was not just weather, it was destiny. If the scorching sun was the first challenge of daily life in ancient Egypt, then the second was the harshness of the very homes people lived in. For most ordinary families, there were no grand palaces, no marble courtyards, no cool gardens filled with shade. Instead, their world was shaped by huts of mud brick and reeds, fragile shelters that offered only the barest protection from the elements. The walls, made from clay mixed with straw, cracked easily under the relentless heat, and the sandy winds that swept across the Nile Valley seemed to find their way through every gap and crevice. Inside, the floor was not polished stone but simply hardened earth, often scattered with sand carried in from the outside. Families laid down straw mats or woven reed mats to soften the ground beneath them, but it was still a rough existence, one that pressed the body into close contact with dust and grit. At night, when the air finally cooled, families would sleep side by side on these mats, often with little more than thin linen cloths to cover them. Privacy was a luxury unknown to most. A single room often held an entire family, parents and children sharing the same small space, their belongings stored in simple baskets or clay jars stacked against the walls. The air was heavy, filled with the earthy smell of mud walls and the faint mustiness of straw. Insects crept in from the darkness, and the night sounds of the Nile frogs. Crickets. The occasional call of a bird mixed with the restless shuffling of bodies seeking comfort on the hard ground. Hygiene was another challenge. Without running water or proper waste systems, cleanliness was always a struggle. People bathed in the river, scooping water with their hands or pouring it from clay pots. But the same river was also a source of silt, mud, and sometimes sickness. The sandy floors of the huts were swept, but dust was ever present, settling on food, bedding, and skin. Soap as we know it today did not exist. Instead, people used natron salts or oils to scrub themselves clean, a process more ritualistic than effective in completely removing the grime of daily life. For the poor, lice, fleas, and other pests were constant companions, and though oils and resins were applied to repel them, no one was ever truly free from their irritation. The combination of heat, dust, and cramped living spaces meant that illness could spread easily. Children, playing barefoot on sandy floors or chasing one another through narrow village lanes, would return home with scratches and sores that were slow to heal. Food, stored in simple clay jars, was vulnerable to spoilage in the heat, and the lack of consistent sanitation turned even small meals into a risk. Yet people endured, because endurance was all they knew. In every reed hut, in every mat spread across a sandy floor, there was a story of survival, a quiet defiance against conditions that were harsh but unchanging. And still, despite the struggle, there was life. The homes, though simple, were filled with laughter when families gathered after long hours of work. Sharing bread, dates, or a jug of beer, children learned to play with toys made from clay or wood, their imaginations transforming the cramped huts into kingdoms of their own. Women painted their eyes with coal, not only to protect against the glare of the sun but also to bring beauty into days that could otherwise feel heavy and monotonous. Men decorated their tools or carved small charms, seeking comfort in craft amidst the starkness of their surroundings. These small acts of humanity softened the edges of a life that might otherwise have felt unbearably harsh. To live in such conditions required resilience, and that resilience became the foundation of the Egyptian spirit. While their monuments rose in stone and their gods were painted in gold, the reality of daily life was shaped by dust, straw, and sweat. It was this very contrast, the grandeur of belief alongside the simplicity of survival, that gave Egyptian civilization its unique depth. For in every fragile hut of reeds and clay, there lived people who endured the weight of the sun, the roughness of the earth, and the constant battle for cleanliness, yet still managed to hold on to joy, faith, and family. Food, too, told a story of survival, and for most Egyptians it was a story marked more by necessity than by indulgence. While the wealthy dined on roasted meats, exotic fruits, and honey cakes, the ordinary families who filled the villages and tilled the fields lived on a diet that was humble, repetitive, and often difficult to digest. Bread was the foundation of every meal, but this was no soft, fluffy bread like we might imagine today. It was coarse, heavy, and filled with grit from the stone mills that ground the grain. Every bite carried the crunch of sand and tiny fragments of quartz, worn into the flour by the grinding stones, slowly eroding the teeth of those who ate it day after day. By middle age, many Egyptians suffered from worn enamel and painful abscesses, the direct cost of their reliance on this most essential food. Alongside bread, beer was the other constant. Brewed thick, cloudy, and more like a nourishing porridge than a drink, it provided the calories and hydration needed to endure long hours in the fields or workshops. Women, even children, consumed it daily, for it was safer than water, less likely to carry disease, and easier to prepare in large quantities. Beer was not a luxury but a lifeline, a liquid form of bread that sustained the body when little else was available. Its flavor was earthy, yeasty, sometimes sour, and though it was rarely refined, it carried with it the comfort of familiarity. To drink beer was to partake in the same rhythm of life repeated for generations, a shared experience that bound families and communities together. The variety of food was limited, and most families could only dream of the fruits, fish, and meats that appeared on the tables of priests, nobles, and royalty. Dates, figs, and onions occasionally brightened the meals of common households, but they were rare treats rather than daily staples. For the majority, the diet remained a cycle of bread, beer, and, when possible, a handful of vegetables or legumes. Meat was scarce, reserved for festivals or sacrifices, and fish from the Nile, though abundant, was often salted or dried to stretch its use. The taste of fat or sweetness was a luxury that most Egyptians knew only a few times a year, if at all, and so the ordinary diet remained one of endurance rather than enjoyment. And yet, even in this simplicity, food carried meaning. Bread was baked in clay ovens that warmed the small huts and filled them with the smell of rising loaves, a reminder that nourishment was possible even in the harshest conditions. Beer was brewed in large jars, bubbling and fermenting in a process that seemed almost magical, a transformation of grain and water into something sustaining. Families gathered around these humble meals not only to eat, but also to share in the comfort of routine, finding in their coarse bread and thick beer a sense of continuity that connected them to the generations before them. It was this diet, basic and unchanging, that allowed the builders of Egypt's monuments to endure long hours beneath the burning sun, lifting stones and carving hieroglyphs that would last for millennia. Bread and beer fueled the hands that raised the pyramids, painted the tombs, and irrigated the fields along the Nile. And while to us it may seem monotonous, to the Egyptians it was enough. It was life, reduced to its most essential form, stripped of luxury but rich in meaning. For within every loaf and every jar was the story of a people who survived, built a civilization that still stands as one of the greatest in history. If food kept the body alive, labor tested its very limits. For life in ancient Egypt was not only about enduring the heat and surviving on coarse bread and beer, but also about pouring every ounce of strength into work that seemed endless and unrelenting. The fertile banks of the Nile offered life, but they demanded sweat in return, and it was the backs of farmers, laborers, and craftsmen that bore the weight of Egypt's greatness. Day after day, men bent over the fields with only the simplest of tools, wooden plows dragged behind oxen, flint sickles sharpened just enough to cut stalks of wheat, and baskets woven from reeds to carry the harvest. There were no machines to ease the burden, only hands hardened by calluses, muscles strained under the sun, and the unchanging rhythm of planting, watering, and cutting, season after season. Farming was not just a way of life but a battle against time, weather, and exhaustion. And yet without it, the entire society would wither, for bread and beer could not exist without the back-breaking toil of those who worked the soil. Beyond the fields, another kind of labor pushed the limits of human endurance, hauling the massive stones that became the temples, tombs, and monuments we marvel at today. The pyramids did not rise by magic, nor did the great temples of Karnak or Luxor appear out of thin air. They were built through the unyielding labor of countless workers, who dragged limestone blocks across ramps of sand, levering them into place with ropes, wooden sledges, and sheer determination. The work was grueling, the stones heavier than anything a single human could ever lift, and yet teams of men moved them through coordination, strength, and persistence. Every block that rose into the sky was a reminder of the human cost behind Egypt's eternal monuments. For the glory of the pharaohs was carved out of the sweat and strain of ordinary hands. And always there were overseers, men appointed to maintain discipline, ensuring that the pace never slowed, that the harvests were gathered, that the stones kept moving, that the projects were finished in time to honor the gods or secure a pharaoh's legacy. Their presence was constant, their eyes sharp, their words commanding. Whips cracked not always to punish, but to remind workers that the task was greater than themselves, that Egypt's order depended on their effort. Discipline was the thread that bound together thousands of laborers, keeping the machine of society running without pause, ensuring that temples rose, fields were harvested, and the Nile's gifts were not wasted. This relentless cycle of work defined the lives of most Egyptians. From dawn until dusk, whether in the fields, in the workshops, or on the construction ramps of monumental projects, the body was pushed to its limits, while the spirit found solace in rituals, prayers, and the faint hope that their labor meant something beyond survival. For though their hands were rough, their backs bent, and their days consumed by labor, they were the lifeblood of a civilization that would outlast them by millennia. Their toil, unseen and often forgotten, was the foundation upon which gods were honored, kings were immortalized, and history itself was written in stone. And yet, for all their endurance, for all the sweat that soaked into the earth and the strength that lifted stones to the skies, life itself was fragile and fleeting in ancient Egypt. The body, worn down by harsh living conditions, a basic diet, and unending labor, rarely carried its owner far into old age. For the majority, the journey of life was cut short before the age of 35, and many never reached that milestone at all. Death was not an unexpected visitor that came only in the twilight of one's years. It was a constant shadow, familiar and near, shaping the way Egyptians viewed time, family, and duty. From the very beginning, survival was uncertain. Infant mortality was heartbreakingly high, with many children never living beyond their first seasons of life. The Nile could bring fertility, but it also carried disease, and the smallest infection or illness could end a life before it had truly begun. For families, the birth of a child was both a moment of joy and of anxious hope, for they knew the risks that lay ahead. Those who survived childhood often carried scars, physical and emotional reminders that life was precious and never guaranteed. This harsh reality forged a society where responsibility came early, where children who survived quickly took on the duties of adulthood. Learning trades, helping in the fields, or caring for siblings while still young themselves. By the time most reached their teens, they were already stepping into the roles their parents had filled. Marrying young, raising families of their own, and contributing to the cycle of labor that sustained their community. There was little time for leisure, and even less for a long youth, for adulthood arrived swiftly and demanded much. The body aged quickly under the relentless strain of work and diet, with teeth ground down from coarse bread, joints stiffened by constant bending and lifting, and immune systems weakened by poor hygiene. It was not uncommon for men and women to feel the burdens of age while still in their 20s. Their bodies weathered long before their spirits. And so, while the monuments of Egypt were built to last forever, the people themselves lived knowing their time was short. This awareness infused their culture with a deep reverence for the afterlife, for eternity was the promise that balanced the brevity of earthly years. Life may have been fleeting, but death was seen not as an end, but as a passage into something greater, a continuation beyond the struggles of the mortal world. Families found comfort in rituals, prayers, and ceremonies that ensured their loved ones would journey safely into the next life, where they might find the peace and longevity denied to them on earth. Thus, the short lifespan of the average Egyptian was not only a reality of biology and environment, but also a force that shaped their beliefs, their values, and their drive to endure. Knowing that time was brief, they worked, worshipped, and raised children in the shadow of mortality, always aware that their days were numbered, yet leaving behind a civilization whose memory outlived them all. Perhaps it was this very closeness to death and the fragile thread of existence that made spirituality the beating heart of Egyptian life. For the people of the Nile did not see their days as random chance or mere survival, but as part of a cosmic order maintained by powers greater than themselves. Every sunrise, every harvest, every flood of the Nile was believed to be the work of the gods, and to live well was to live in harmony with this divine design. At the center of their spiritual worldview was Mat, the principle of truth, justice, and balance, a force as real to them as the river that sustained their crops or the sun that scorched their skin. To follow Mat was to ensure not only peace in the land, but also salvation in the world beyond. For Egyptians believed that the universe itself was fragile, held together by this delicate equilibrium between chaos and order. Life was filled with rituals to honor the gods. For it was through devotion and offerings that one could hope to secure their favor. Temples echoed with prayers. Inns drifted through sacred halls. And families left food and drink at household shrines to honor deities who watched over fertility, health, and protection from misfortune. The great gods Ra, Isis, Osiris, Hathor, Nubis were not distant myths but constant presences woven into daily existence. The rising sun was not merely a celestial event, it was Ra's rebirth, proof that the cycle of life endured. The flooding of the Nile was not just water spilling over banks. It was a divine gift, a reminder that life and sustenance flowed from forces beyond human control. Yet beneath this devotion lay a deep and abiding fear not of death itself, but of judgment in the afterlife. To the Egyptians, life was a brief test, and death was a gateway to eternity. But that eternity was not promised to all. When a person passed into the realm of the dead, their heart would be weighed against the feather of Mat by Osiris and the gods of judgment. A heart heavy with lies, cruelty, or selfishness would tip the scales, condemning its owner to be devoured by Amit, the fearsome devourer of souls, ending all hope of existence beyond the grave. But a heart that was light, pure, and aligned with Mat would be granted eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise where one could enjoy abundance, rest, and peace forever. This belief shaped every choice, every action, and every ritual in life. To speak truthfully, to act justly, to care for family, to show respect to gods and neighbors, all these were more than moral obligations. They were preparations for the weighing of the heart. Egyptians lived not only for the present but with the awareness that every deed echoed into eternity. To neglect a ritual, to act justly, to disrupt the balance of Mat, was to risk not only the anger of the gods in this life, but eternal condemnation in the next. And so their spirituality was not a distant doctrine, but the very foundation of survival, giving meaning to short and difficult lives, offering hope against the certainty of death, and binding a civilization together under the shared pursuit of order, balance, and eternal peace. The gods were guardians, judges, and companions, and to live in Egypt was to live always in their presence, striving to leave behind a heart light enough to face the eternal scales. If the Egyptians placed such weight on the afterlife, it was because survival in this life was never guaranteed, and illness could strike as suddenly and mercilessly as the desert winds. In a land where the Nile's gift of fertility was matched by swarms of insects, infections, and diseases born from stagnant water, health was as fragile as the papyrus reeds that lined the river banks. Yet to the Egyptians, sickness was not seen as a mere physical failing, but as a disturbance in the harmony of body, spirit, and the cosmic order itself. Just as the gods ruled over the cycles of sun and flood, they also held sway over health and healing. And so medicine was never divorced from magic, but rather bound to it in an inseparable union of ritual, charm, and remedy. To seek a cure was to appeal both to the wisdom of healers and the favor of divine powers. A physician might crush herbs into a paste to soothe an infection, or mix honey with resin to dress a wound. But alongside these tangible remedies came whispered incantations, protective amulets hung around the neck, and charms inscribed with sacred words meant to drive away the invisible forces believed to cause affliction. Illness was often thought of as the work of hostile spirits or the wrath of neglected gods. And so a cure required not only physical treatment but spiritual reconciliation. An amulet shaped like the Eye of Horus might be tied to the patient's wrist to restore balance and protection, while a priest-physician muttered prayers to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of both plague and healing, asking her to turn her destructive power into mercy. These practices were not dismissed as superstition but understood as essential layers of defense. For to the Egyptian mind, health was a battle fought on both earthly and divine fronts. To wear a scarab charm was not just a gesture of faith but an act of medicine, shielding the soul from corruption and warding off unseen dangers. To recite words over a mixture of herbs was to empower it with divine strength, binding the physical and spiritual into one force of healing. Even childbirth, a moment fraught with danger, was surrounded by spells and talismans invoking the protection of Taret, the goddess with the form of a hippopotamus, whose fierce presence was thought to keep both mother and child safe. In this world, the line between healer and priest was thin, and often the two roles overlapped. The physician could stitch wounds or set broken bones with skill passed down through generations, but he would also chant spells from papyrus texts filled with recipes for both potions and prayers. A common remedy might begin with instructions to crush garlic or grind juniper berries, followed immediately by a ritual plea to the gods for their blessing. To heal was to restore balance, not only in the flesh but in the unseen fabric of the universe. Thus, Egyptian medicine was not simply a practice of trial and error, nor solely a matter of faith. It was a sophisticated blending of observation, herbal knowledge, and spiritual conviction, a system that gave people comfort and hope even in the shadow of suffering. To hold an amulet in one's hand, to hear a priest's chant mingling with the scent of herbs, was to believe that healing was possible, that the gods had not abandoned the sick, and that life, however precarious, was still worth clinging to. Yet even in a society shaped by hardship, illness, and the ever-present weight of divine judgment, life in ancient Egypt revealed surprising complexities, especially when it came to the place of women within their world. Unlike many other civilizations of the ancient past, where women were often reduced to shadows behind men, the Egyptian view of gender carried a thread of balance that echoed their spiritual principle of Mat, the eternal law of harmony and order. Women were not equal in every respect, of course, for their daily burdens were heavy and their roles deeply tied to family and household survival. But within this framework, they possessed rights that were extraordinary for their time and almost unheard of in neighboring lands. An Egyptian woman could stand in a court of law and speak for herself, not as a silent figure but as a recognized participant whose testimony carried weight. She could inherit land, property, and wealth, passing it down to her children or managing it in her own name, a freedom that astonished outsiders who came from cultures where women were rarely more than dependents of their fathers or husbands. Marriage itself, while rooted in duty and survival, was not a prison without doors. Women could divorce their husbands, reclaim their dowry, and return to their families, a measure of independence that gave them dignity in a harsh and uncertain world. Life still demanded sacrifice. A woman rose at dawn with the first light of Ra, her hands roughened from grinding grain into flour, her back bent from hauling water from the Nile, her time consumed with weaving linen or tending to children. Yet beneath these ordinary labors lay a current of agency, for her work contributed not only to survival but to the fabric of the household economy. A jar of beer she brewed or a length of linen she wove might be traded, creating influence and respect within her community. And when festivals and rituals filled the air with music and chants, women could take roles as singers, dancers, or priestesses, their voices and movements offering devotion to the gods alongside the prayers of men. This recognition of women's place extended even into the grand stage of power. History remembers queens such as Hatshepsut, who donned the regalia of kingship and ruled with authority, and Nefertiti, whose image still gazes out across millennia as both a symbol of beauty and of influence beside her husband Akhenaten. Though such figures were rare, their very existence proved that Egyptian society understood the potential for women to wield authority in both sacred and political realms. For the common woman, these examples served not only as distant legends but as reminders that within the cosmic order of Egypt, the female voice had a place, and sometimes even a powerful one. To walk through the streets of Thebes or Memphis and see women bartering in the markets, testifying in disputes, or preserving household wealth was to recognize a society where gender did not wholly silence them. Life was still perilous, filled with labor and limitation. Yet compared to the countless women across other ancient lands, an Egyptian woman lived with rights that gave her a measure of security, dignity, and power. Just as amulets and charms shielded the body from unseen forces, these rights shielded her life from absolute dependence, allowing her to carve a place for herself in a world where survival was already fragile enough. But to truly understand ancient Egypt, one must step beyond the daily rhythm of life and into the shadow of death. For in no other culture was the boundary between living and dying so deeply woven into every choice. Every ritual, every breath. The Egyptians believed that existence was not confined to the span of years granted under the sun's blazing light, but stretched into an eternal journey that began the moment one's earthly body ceased to move. To them, death was not an end but a passage, a crossing into another realm where the soul would continue to walk, eat, work, and dream. Because of this belief, burials were never simple acts of farewell. They were elaborate preparations, carefully staged performances of devotion and hope, designed to equip the departed for the eternal voyage that awaited beyond the tomb's sealed door. For the poorest of families, this might mean a modest grave, perhaps a basket or simple pit dug into the desert sands, accompanied by a handful of small offerings, clay pots filled with beer or bread, tokens of sustenance to nourish the soul on its path. But for the wealthier, and above all for the nobles and pharaohs, burials became grand affairs where no expense was spared, for the afterlife was thought to mirror life itself, and one's possessions in this world determined one's comfort in the next. Inside these tombs, treasures were not just symbols of status but tools for survival beyond death. Beds carved of wood, jars filled with oils, mulettes pressed with sacred symbols, and even board games like Senet were placed lovingly beside the wrapped body, each item holding purpose, each object acting as a companion to the soul in its unseen journey. Imagine stepping into one of these silent chambers, the air heavy with the scent of resins and incense, the walls painted with vibrant scenes of harvests, banquets, and journeys across the Nile. Here the dead were not pictured lying still in eternal silence, but alive hunting birds among the papyrus reeds, plowing fields under the benevolent gaze of Osiris, dining with family in never-ending feasts. The tomb was not a prison but a home designed to echo life, a place where the departed could continue their joys without fear of hunger or loss. It was a carefully constructed doorway, where the living offered their love through ritual and wealth, and where the dead prepared to walk into forever. For the pharaohs, this devotion to the afterlife reached its grandest form in the monumental tombs that still rise against the Egyptian horizon. The pyramids themselves, colossal mountains of stone, were not simply displays of power, but sacred vessels built to protect the king's soul as it ascended toward the heavens. Within, chambers were filled with gold, jewelry, weapons, and intricate carvings, all meant to ensure that the pharaoh's spirit would live as a god among the stars. Even thousands of years later, when explorers uncovered the untouched tomb of Tutankhamun, the site of glittering treasures, golden masks, and delicate carvings revealed just how deeply the Egyptians believed in preparing for eternity. And yet, this was not only about wealth or grandeur, it was about faith. Every object placed in a tomb carried meaning. A simple clay figurine could become a servant in the afterlife, tending fields so the soul might rest. A necklace shaped with the eye of Horus could shield against evil on the long journey through the underworld. Death was not feared as annihilation, but revered as transformation, and the tomb, filled with these sacred possessions, was the vessel of that transformation. Thus, in Egypt, the story of life always pointed toward the story of death. To live was to prepare for the afterlife, and to die was to continue living in another form. This unbroken cycle, preserved through their tombs and treasures, ensured that even thousands of years later, the voices of the Egyptians still whisper through the desert winds, reminding us that for them, eternity was not just an idea but a promise carved into stone and sealed with love. Yet even as the Egyptians poured their hearts, wealth, and faith into these sacred resting places, there lingered an ever-present shadow, one born not of gods or spirits, but of human greed. The treasure sealed within tombs, meant to safeguard the soul on its eternal voyage, became irresistible lures for the living. From the moment the first stone was laid to seal a burial chamber, whispers of its contents would ripple through the desert winds. The promise of glittering gold, fine jewelry, rare oils, and sacred relics ignited a hunger that no fear of curses could fully extinguish. Tomb robbery in Egypt was not an isolated crime but a widespread reality, a secret war waged in silence between the living and the dead. Entire families sometimes plotted together, guided by rumors or insider knowledge from laborers who once worked on the tombs themselves. Under the cover of night, thieves crept across the sands, their steps soft against the desert floor as they sought to outwit the gods themselves. They chipped through limestone blocks, tunneled into burial shafts, and pried open sacred seals, each strike of their tools echoing like a betrayal against eternity. The Egyptians were not blind to this danger. Architects and priests designed tombs like puzzles, building winding corridors, hidden chambers, and false doors meant to confuse intruders. Walls bore painted warnings of divine wrath, while inscriptions promised that thieves would face curses too terrible to imagine blindness, madness, or eternal torment in the afterlife. Some tombs even contained physical traps, collapsing ceilings, secret shafts, or heavy stone blocks poised to crush anyone daring enough to disturb the resting place within. Yet for all these efforts, few defenses could withstand the determination of the desperate and the greedy. Imagine the tense silence of a group of robbers as they pushed deeper into a dark passageway, their flickering lamps casting shadows across the carved faces of gods painted on the walls. Every creak of stone, every gust of stale air felt like the breath of Osiris himself. Watching, waiting, ready to strike. Some turned back, trembling with fear, convinced that the curses were real. But others pressed forward, driven by hunger, poverty, or the intoxicating dream of riches beyond imagining. And when at last they broke into the burial chamber, the sight that met their eyes was both awe-inspiring and damning. Golden coffins, alabaster jars, intricate statues gleaming under the light, all placed there not for the living, but for the soul's eternal voyage. It is tempting to imagine that the curses always prevailed, that thieves were struck down by divine justice, but history tells a harsher truth. Many tombs we now study bear clear signs of plunder, their treasures long stolen, their walls scarred by careless hands. Even the grand pyramids, once thought invincible, were not spared, their chambers emptied centuries ago. And yet, some tombs did remain untouched, buried deep beneath shifting sands, their secrets hidden until modern times. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings, almost miraculously preserved, stands as a rare exception in a landscape where most graves had been stripped bare long before archaeologists ever arrived. In the end, the tale of tomb robbery is one of irony, a clash between the Egyptian dream of eternity and the earthly desires of those who could not resist the pull of treasure. It reminds us that even in a land where gods ruled and death was sacred, human weakness often held the power to undo the greatest efforts of faith and devotion. And so, alongside the glory of pyramids and the beauty of painted tombs, there exists another story, one of shadows, greed, and the relentless pursuit of gold that has echoed through time, leaving behind empty chambers and broken seals as silent witnesses to the fragility of human resolve. But if the treasures of gold and alabaster were vulnerable to thieves, there was another treasure of Egypt that proved far more enduring and far more difficult to steal: the written word. For the Egyptians, writing was not merely a tool for keeping records. It was a living art, a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a way of giving voice to eternity. Their script, which we now call hieroglyphics, was unlike anything else in the ancient world. At first glance, it appeared almost like a painting, a tapestry woven from tiny birds, animals, eyes, hands, and abstract shapes, each etched with precision and care onto stone walls. Papyrus scrolls and sacred objects. To the untrained eye, these symbols seemed like decoration, but to those who could read them, they carried stories, prayers, and laws that bound society together. Hieroglyphics were far from simple. Each symbol could shift meaning depending on context. Some stood for entire words, others for sounds, and some carried hidden layers of symbolism that tied back to the gods themselves. Unlike the straightforward alphabets we use today, the Egyptians omitted vowels and left no spaces between words. So reading hieroglyphs required both knowledge and intuition. A single line of text could be read left to right to left, or even top to bottom, depending on the way the figures were facing. Imagine the challenge of standing before a wall covered in thousands of carefully carved symbols, each one needing to be unraveled like a puzzle. Only the highly trained scribes, and sometimes women of rare skill, could master this sacred art, and in their hands, writing became a form of power. The scribes were not merely record keepers. They were the guardians of memory and tradition, the ones who ensured that the words of kings, the prayers of priests, and the stories of ordinary lives would not vanish with the passing of time. To be a scribe in ancient Egypt was to hold a position of deep respect, for writing itself was believed to be a gift from the god Thoth, lord of wisdom and knowledge. Each hieroglyph, carefully carved into stone or brushed onto papyrus, was more than a mark on a page. It was a fragment of divine energy, a charm against forgetting, a tool to preserve truth in a world where sand and time threatened to erase everything. Consider the way hieroglyphics filled tomes and temples, every wall live with images and text, every symbol carrying the weight of eternity. They were not content with mere storytelling. They sought permanence. While papyrus scrolls might crumble, inscriptions on stone remained, speaking across millennia. Through them, the voices of the past still echo to us today. Without hieroglyphics, we might never have known the names of forgotten pharaohs, the details of sacred rituals, or the everyday concerns of farmers, soldiers, and artisans whose lives would otherwise have been lost to silence. In this way, writing became another form of immortality. Just as the Egyptians filled tombs with treasures for the afterlife, they filled walls with words, ensuring that the spirit of the deceased would be remembered and that their story would live on. For them, to write was not only to communicate, but to defy death itself. Even when tomes were robbed and treasures stripped away, the carved inscriptions endured, speaking across time with a voice that could not be silenced by greed or decay. It was through this silent, enduring language that Egypt's world of gods, rituals, and daily struggles became known to us, long after the last pharaoh's tomb had been sealed, while the Egyptians etched their eternity into stone with hieroglyphs. Another people, separated by vast oceans and centuries, sought to write their legacy not through words but through the very fabric of their city. In the highlands of central Mexico, the great city of Teotihuacan emerged, a place so vast, so carefully planned, and so symbolically charged that it still inspires awe and mystery today. To walk through its ruins is to step into a cosmic map, a city built not only for its people but also for the gods and the heavens themselves. Its streets, plazas, and towering pyramids were not arranged at random. They followed alignments tied to celestial movements, turning the city into a living calendar, a bridge between earth and sky. At the heart of Teotihuacan stood the monumental Pyramid of the Sun, one of the largest structures ever built in the ancient world, rising like a man-made mountain of stone. Climbing its steep steps, one would have felt the weight of ritual, for this was not simply a structure but a sacred stage, a platform for ceremonies meant to connect humanity to the divine. Nearby, the Pyramid of the Moon anchored the city's northern axis, gazing toward the mountains, while the Avenue of the Dead stretched between them like a ceremonial spine, flanked by temples, plazas, and residences. Every structure was imbued with symbolism, every orientation chosen with intention. For Teotihuacan was more than a city, it was a cosmic diagram, a reflection of the universe laid upon the earth. Imagine approaching this metropolis in its prime, centuries before the Spanish conquest, when its wide boulevards echoed with the sounds of footsteps, chants, and the murmur of thousands of people. The facades of its temples glowed with painted murals, bright reds, deep blues, vivid greens depicting deities, animals, and sacred symbols. Feathered serpents coiled across the temple of the feathered serpent, their jaws open, their bodies adorned with shells and jewels, each one a reminder of the power and danger of the divine. Traders from distant lands carried obsidian blades, precious feathers, cacao beans, filling the markets with goods and voices from far and wide. Teotihuacan was not only a city, it was a crossroads, a hub where religion, economy, and politics converged beneath the gaze of monumental stone. Yet beneath its grandeur lay a deeper, more enigmatic meaning. The city's very layout was a statement about humanity's place in the cosmos. Its builders aligned avenues and pyramids with the setting sun, the cycles of Venus, and the sacred mountains surrounding the valley. Doing so, they transformed Teotihuacan into a stage upon which cosmic dramas unfolded, where rituals of fire and sacrifice sought to maintain balance between the earthly and celestial realms. To live within its walls was to live inside a sacred order, where the movement of the stars dictated the rhythm of daily life, and where architecture itself became a kind of scripture, eternal and enduring, long after the voices of its builders fell silent. Even today, standing among its ruins, one cannot escape the feeling that Teotihuacan was designed to be more than a human settlement. It was a place of vision, a city that tried to capture the universe in stone, to freeze eternity within walls and pyramids, leaving behind a legacy that continues to whisper across the centuries. Among the most striking monuments of Teotihuacan, perhaps none was as haunting or as symbolically charged as the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, also known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. To approach it in the city's prime would have been to stand before a structure alive with imagery, its stone walls carved with the likeness of plumed serpents whose scaled bodies undulated along the facade, their gaping jaws decorated with shells, fangs, and intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the light. Each serpent was more than just decoration, it was a living emblem of divine power, a reminder that the boundary between earth and sky, between humanity and the gods, was fragile and constantly in need of reformation. But the temple was not only built with stone and artistry, it was consecrated with blood and life itself. For every stage of its construction was marked by ritual offerings, some of which involved the ultimate sacrifice. Imagine the scene in its full solemnity, the city as priests, clad in elaborate costumes of feathers, jade, and obsidian, standing upon the steps of the temple as the air filled with smoke from burning copal incense. The people gathered in the plaza below, their eyes fixed on the ceremonies that would bind the city's destiny to the will of the gods. At the heart of these rituals were sacrifices meant to sanctify the temple and ensure its spiritual potency. Each layer of the structure, as it rose higher toward the heavens, was sealed not only with stone but with the essence of life, for it was believed that only through such offerings could the gods be appeased and the cosmic order maintained. These ceremonies were not casual acts but profound performances, believed to weave the city itself into the very fabric of the universe. Archaeologists, centuries later, would uncover mass graves beneath the temple, the remains of warriors and individuals whose lives had been given in service to something far greater than themselves. Many were buried with ornaments of jade and shell, some with weapons, others bound and placed in precise arrangements, their positions reflecting the ritualistic intent of the ceremonies. To the builders of Teotihuacan, these individuals were not lost but transformed, becoming eternal guardians of the temple and its sacred purpose. Their presence consecrated the monument, ensuring that it would stand not merely as stone but as a living vessel of divine power, anchored by the sacrifice of those who had become part of its foundation. For the people who walked through the grand avenues of Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent would have been a constant reminder of both reverence and fear. Its presence proclaimed the might of the gods, the authority of the city's leaders, and the necessity of keeping the balance between humanity and the divine. Each feathered serpent carved into the facade seemed to coil outward into eternity, echoing the endless cycle of creation and destruction, life and death, or in chaos. The temple was not only an architectural marvel but a sacred promise, sealed with rituals so powerful that even today, standing in its ruins, one can feel a shadow of the reverence it commanded. To fully understand the spirit of Teotihuacan, one must first set aside the modern lens that views ritual killings as cruel punishments or acts of cruelty. For in that ancient world they were never meant as retribution for crime or transgression. Instead, they were offerings solemn, deliberate, and deeply woven into the spiritual fabric of the city. To the people of Teotihuacan, life itself was the most precious gift that could be placed upon the altar of the gods, a sacred exchange that maintained the harmony of the cosmos. They believed that the universe was sustained through cycles of giving and receiving, that the sun would not rise, the rains would not fall, and the crops would not grow unless humanity upheld its part of the bargain with the divine. And so, When chosen individuals were led to the sacred temples, it was not as criminals to be punished, but as vessels through whom the bond between mortals and gods could be renewed. The rituals were shrouded in reverence. Priests adorned in vibrant feathers and shimmering ornaments guided the proceedings with chants that resonated through the plazas, their voices rising in unison with the beating of drums that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the earth. Incense filled the air, mingling with the sound of conch shells and the deep rumble of ceremonial horns, creating an atmosphere that was both solemn and transcendent. Those who were chosen for sacrifice were not seen as outcasts or condemned souls, but as participants in a sacred duty. They were warriors captured in battle, whose lives would continue with honor in the afterlife as guardians of the city, their essence joining the eternal cycle that bound Teotihuacan to the gods. To stand before the temple and witness such a rite was to witness an exchange of immense spiritual weight, one that reminded every onlooker that their city was not merely stone and mortar, but a living entity dependent on the careful balance of divine reciprocity. What modern minds may interpret as grim, the people of Teotihuacan regarded as vital. For without these offerings, the delicate balance of the universe could collapse. Crops could wither in the fields, drought could parch the land, or the sun itself could falter in its path across the sky. Thus, sacrifice was not an act of violence for its own sake, but a sacred necessity, a ritual that tied the destiny of the community to the eternal rhythms of creation and destruction. In the worldview of this civilization, to give life was to sustain life, and those who became offerings were believed to walk on into a realm where their sacrifice would be honored and remembered. Even today, when one stands in the shadow of the temple of the feathered serpent and gazes upon the stone serpents coiled in eternal motion, it is not difficult to imagine the solemnity of those moments. When the plaza was filled with chanting voices and the air shimmered with incense smoke. When human lives were offered not as punishment but as gifts meant to ensure that the sun would rise again over the great city of Teotihuacan. Their belief in this exchange may seem distant to us now, but to them it was the very heartbeat of existence, the unbroken thread that tied their people to the gods they served. The grandeur of Teotihuacan was not only in the size of its pyramids or the artistry carved into its walls, but also in the way the entire city was conceived as something far greater than a settlement of stone and clay. To walk its avenues was to move within a design that mirrored the heavens. For Teotihuacan was built as a living reflection of the cosmos, a spiritual machine crafted with intention so precise that even centuries later its alignment still whispers of mysteries not yet fully understood. The Avenue of the Dead, that vast and solemn roadway stretching across the city, was not laid down at random, but with careful orientation towards celestial movements, embodying the path between the earthly and the divine. The pyramids of the sun and the moon rose like colossal markers of eternity, their placement echoing the rhythm of the stars and the turning of the seasons, as though the very stones were set to the heartbeat of the universe itself. Every structure carried weight beyond function. The plazas, with their open expanses, were not merely gathering places but sacred stages where ritual and life intertwined, where chants, dances, and offerings connected the people to the eternal cycle that governed their existence. The walls were adorned with images of jaguars, serpents, and celestial beings, each symbol charged with meaning, each design an invocation of cosmic power. Temples were oriented so that the sun at solstice or equinox would cast light in ways that transformed ordinary stone into a glowing testament of divine presence, reminding the people that they lived not in a city of men alone, but in a place where earth and sky were forever bound. To the citizens of Teotihuacan, their city was not a passive backdrop but an active participant in ritual life, a grand mechanism through which the forces of creation could flow and be harmonized. It was as though the builders sought to bind the heavens to the soil, to ensure that every sunrise, every phase of the moon, every star appearing in the night sky found its echo in the geometry of their streets and temples. In this vision, the city itself became an offering, a vast prayer carved into the landscape, its stones serving not only as monuments to human ingenuity, but as instruments through which divine order could be maintained. To live within such a place was to wake each day within the arms of the cosmos, to walk through corridors of stone that resonated with spiritual meaning, to feel oneself a thread woven into the great tapestry of creation. Even today, when time has softened the edges of its pyramids and silence has replaced the thunder of ritual, the essence of that vision endures. Visitors who stand at the heart of Teotihuacan, gazing down the Avenue of the Dead or climbing the steps of the Pyramid of the Sun, often describe a feeling that is difficult to put into words, as though the stones themselves hum with an ancient memory, as though the city still waits to fulfill its role as a bridge between the human and the divine. It is this lingering aura that reminds us Teotihuacan was never merely a city, but a carefully constructed universe, a spiritual engine designed to synchronize humanity with the eternal movements of the heavens. Yet for all its magnificence, one of the most fascinating aspects of Teotihuacan is how its influence radiated across Mesoamerica without leaving behind a single written record of its rulers or its daily governance, as though the city itself wished to remain shrouded in mystery. Unlike Egypt with its carved hieroglyphs or Mesopotamia with its cuneiform tablets, Teotihuacan left no inscriptions to declare the names of its kings, no chronicles to boast of victories, no dynastic lineages to be remembered by posterity. Instead, its power flowed outward in ways both subtle and unmistakable, carried not by words on stone but by the weight of its culture, its architecture, its spiritual vision. Pottery styles born in the workshops of Teotihuacan were unearthed hundreds of miles away, recognizable by their distinct forms and painted designs. Murals painted with the vivid imagery of jaguars, serpents, and storm gods echoed far beyond the city's borders, as though the very language of color and symbol became the writing system that needed no alphabet. Merchants, priests, and emissaries traveled along ancient trade routes, bringing obsidian blades cut from the rich quarries near Teotihuacan, feathers shimmering with iridescent green, and shells from distant coasts, objects that carried with them not just material value, but also the weight of spiritual significance. Wherever these goods appeared, so too did the aura of Teotihuacan, whispering of a place where humans touched the cosmos through ritual and stone. Other cities began to adopt aspects of its style, building temples in similar orientations, imitating its murals, and integrating its deities into their own pantheons. Even mighty Maya city-states felt its presence. Their rulers sometimes depicted wearing headdresses or garments that bore the unmistakable mark of Teotihuacan and its iconography. The absence of written records did not diminish its reach. In some ways, it amplified the enigma. Without words to guide us, we are left with shadows, with fragments, with the enduring resonance of a city that exerted power through vision and example, rather than proclamations. To later generations, Teotihuacan became a place of legend, a city of gods rather than men. Its origin and collapse woven into myth, because no chronicles survived to tether it to ordinary history. Perhaps this was deliberate, a decision by its leaders to construct a legacy not in parchment or inscription, but in a silence that allowed the city itself to become the message. Its pyramids and avenues spoke louder than words, carrying across centuries a sense of timeless majesty, as though the city wished to transcend the frailty of human language and instead communicate directly with the eternal. Even now, as archaeologists sift through its ruins and scholars piece together clues from shards of pottery and faded frescoes, Teotihuacan resists being fully understood. Its influence lingers in ways that seem to defy time, a ripple in history that spreads outward with no clear origin point. In this silence lies its true power, the ability to inspire awe without explanation, to command respect without a voice, to remain relevant not through records of conquests or laws, but through the sheer weight of its enduring mystery. Long before humans learned to shape words into language, before the rise of writing or the birth of cities, rhythm already pulsed through the world like an invisible heartbeat, guiding the steps of life itself. The earliest people did not need speech to feel its presence. They found it in the steady crashing of waves upon the shore, in the drum of rainfall against leaves, in the thunder that shook the sky, and in the echo of their own feet striking the earth as they ran across open ground. At some unrecorded moment in prehistory, a pair of hands struck a hollow log, a stretched hide, or even the surface of stone, and the first deliberate human drumbeat rang out, carrying with it a power that required no translation. That sound was more than noise, it was order, repetition, and pattern, a rhythm that allowed scattered individuals to come together, to move in unison, to share an experience larger than themselves. In this way, rhythm was humanity's earliest form of communication, older than words, older than symbols, capable of uniting people before they even had the means to speak to one another. A steady beat could signal the start of a hunt, summon a group to gather around the fire, or create a sense of belonging that transcended the silence of primitive speechless nights. Rhythm became the shared language of the body, expressed through clapping, stomping, or the pounding of simple drums, each beat echoing the very pulse of the human heart. And as this heartbeat spread from one person to another, entire groups could feel themselves bound together in invisible threads, carried not by language but by sound. The power of rhythm was so instinctive that it shaped not only gatherings, but also the inner world of early humans. The repetition of a beat could soothe a fear, sharpen focus, or ignite energy, offering comfort in an uncertain world. Imagine a small community huddled in a cave while storms raged outside. The sound of rain became a natural rhythm that eased their fear, while the crackling fire added its own syncopated voice, creating a primitive symphony that reassured them of survival. When hunters returned victorious, stamping their feet and clapping their hands in rhythmic patterns, the group celebrated in unison, their bodies moving instinctively, creating dances that would outlive generations. Rhythm was more than entertainment, it was survival, for it forged unity, order, and spirit in a world where chaos often threatened to overwhelm. This primal heartbeat, born long before speech, would endure across every age of human history, weaving its way into ritual, religion, celebration, even warfare. It is no wonder that when words later emerged, they did not replace rhythm but instead rode upon it, carried by the cadence of chants, the rise and fall of song, and the measured drumbeat that gave structure to ceremony. In this sense, rhythm can be seen as the foundation upon which all music, all speech, and perhaps even all culture was built, a force so ancient and so deeply embedded in our species that it continues to echo within us every time our hearts beat in our chests. As human communities grew more complex, rhythm did not fade into the background of daily life but instead took on roles of immense cultural and spiritual significance. And at the heart of this evolution stood the drum, a simple yet powerful instrument whose voice could command attention, stir emotion, and even carry messages across distances where words could not reach. Across continents and centuries, societies discovered that the drum was more than an instrument of sound, it was a tool of unity, of order, of communication, and of power, capable of shaping the rhythm of both individual lives and entire civilizations. In Africa, where some of the world's oldest drumming traditions still survive, the drum became the voice of the village itself, a pulse that bound the community together, for its rhythms carried meaning that went beyond music. A skilled drummer could send coded messages across the forest, using patterns that villagers understood as language, summoning people to gatherings, announcing dangers, or spreading news more swiftly than the human voice alone ever could. The drum was also a sacred bridge to the spiritual world, used in ceremonies that called upon ancestors and deities, with rhythms designed not merely to entertain but to alter consciousness, lifting participants into states where they felt closer to the divine. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, drums echoed through temples as offerings were made to gods who demanded order and reverence. Priests used rhythmic beats to sanctify rituals, believing that the steady pulse aligned human actions with cosmic forces, bringing balance and favor from the heavens. Drums were not only religious but also political, their sounds announcing the power of kings, reverberating through city walls as symbols of authority and control. Far to the east in Japan, massive taiko drums shook the earth with their thunderous voices, their rhythms woven into Shinto ceremonies and festivals, uniting entire communities through sheer vibration. The pounding of taiko was believed to mirror the heartbeat of nature itself, a sound that cleansed the spirit and honored the gods. When played in unison by dozens of drummers, the experience was overwhelming, transforming the collective energy of performers and audiences alike into something transcendent. In Indonesia, especially within the island cultures where gamelan and cymbals flourished, Drums guided intricate musical patterns that carried profound spiritual meaning. Each beat was not random but carefully placed to reflect cosmic harmony, a reflection of how people believed the universe itself operated in cycles of order and return. The drum there was not simply about sound, it was about connection, a way of linking human life to the great rhythm of creation. And across the vast Americas, drums held equal importance. From the great cities of the Maya and Aztec to the sacred traditions of countless indigenous nations. For some, the drum was considered a living being, its hide and wood forming a voice that echoed the heartbeat of the earth. In ceremonies, warriors and shamans alike turned to its power. In warfare, the drum announced courage, terror, and unity, guiding fighters into rhythm as they advanced, while in sacred rituals it summoned spirits, accompanied dances, and opened pathways between the physical and the spiritual. From one corner of the world to another, the drum proved to be more than an instrument of music. It was a vessel of meaning, a force that transcended language, a heartbeat that united communities in ritual, in battle, and in celebration. What began as the simple act of striking hollow wood or stretched skin had grown into a global language, understood instinctively by all people, carrying with it the same primal resonance that first echoed in the dawn of human history. Beyond its role as sound and signal, the drum carried with it a spiritual and communal essence that reached into the deepest layers of human existence, shaping not just moments of ceremony or battle, but the very way people understood their connection to each other and to the unseen forces they believed surrounded them. Its pulse was not random noise, it was intention made audible, a rhythm that aligned human hearts to a greater order. Guiding meditation, summoning gods, and uniting warriors beneath one shared beat. In the stillness of sacred gatherings, the drum was often the first and last sound to be heard, its steady cadence grounding worshippers as they prepared to cross the threshold between the ordinary and the divine. Monks and shamans alike discovered that a simple repetitive beat could shift the mind from restless wandering to focused stillness, helping practitioners sink deeper into meditation, where the self seemed to dissolve and clarity arose like light breaking through clouds. In these spaces, the drum became a doorway, carrying souls into altered states where they felt as though they touched eternity. To many ancient cultures, rhythm was also the language of gods, and the drum the tool through which mortals could speak to them. When priests struck their instruments in precise patterns, they believed they were sending signals upward, calling deities into presence. Each beat a step that built a bridge between earth and heaven. Communities gathered to witness these ceremonies, believing that the sound itself opened a path through which blessings and power could descend. In this way, the drum was more than ritual ornament, it was a sacred necessity, the voice of prayer given flesh in vibration and sound. Yet its purpose was not limited to prayer halls and temples. On the battlefield, the drum carried an equally profound weight, for it turned chaos into order, fear into courage, and scattered individuals into a single unified force. Warriors marched to its pulse, their steps synchronized, their hearts steadied by its unwavering presence, its rhythm giving them the sense that they were no longer fighting as isolated men, but as one body, one will, one power moving forward. The drum's thunder could strike fear into the enemy long before the clash began, for its sound announced not only an approaching army, but a spirit bound together, so tightly by rhythm that it seemed unbreakable. Even outside of war, the drum acted as a communal heartbeat, binding people together in dances, festivals, and rites of passage. Each strike reminded listeners that they were part of something larger than themselves, a single rhythm shared by many, a rhythm that mirrored the beating of their own hearts and the endless pulse of the natural world around them. In this way, the drum was both anchor and guide, holding communities in unity whether in times of joy, grief, preparation, or transcendence. Thus, through meditation, worship, and warfare, the drum revealed itself as more than wood and skin. It was a living spirit, a force that reached across the human and divine, shaping not only what people heard, but what they believed, felt, and became together. As centuries rolled forward and civilizations rose and fell, the drum did not fade into silence but instead evolved, reshaping itself alongside the people who carried it, adapting to new cultures, new beliefs, new expressions of human creativity. What began as a hollowed log struck with sticks or hands, meant to summon gods, unify tribes, or command armies, gradually transformed into an instrument capable of expressing the full range of human emotion, from the deepest sorrow to the wildest celebration. With each passing era, rhythm was reimagined, and the drum found new voices to speak through. When enslaved Africans were brought across oceans, they carried rhythm in their souls. Even when denied their instruments, their beats lived on in hand claps, foot stomps, and call and response songs. And these rhythms became the foundation for entire musical traditions in the Americas. Out of suffering grew resilience, and out of resilience came the roots of blues, gospel, and eventually the pulse that gave birth to jazz. In jazz, the drum kit emerged as a revolution, combining bass drum, snare, cymbals, and tums into a single station where one musician could command a full range of rhythms. The drummer was no longer a background figure but a heartbeat guiding improvisation, accenting melodies, and sometimes even leading the way into unexplored musical territories. As the 20th century surged with change, rhythm found itself at the center of yet another transformation. Rock and roll exploded onto the scene, powered by relentless drum beats that drove energy through every chord and lyric. The snare's crack and the bass drum's thump became the voice of rebellion, freedom, and youthful spirit, propelling songs that could ignite dance floors, stadiums, and cultural revolutions alike. Drummers like Keith Moon, John Bonham, and countless others pushed the boundaries of what was possible, turning rhythm into spectacle, force, and identity. The drum kit was no longer just accompaniment. It was the raw power that carried the soul of the music. Then came the age of experimentation, where electronic sounds entered the stage. From funk and disco grooves to the pioneering beats of hip-hop, rhythm was reinvented yet again, blending the organic pulse of sticks on skins with the synthetic precision of drum machines. The Roland TR-808 and other digital marvels did not erase the ancient heartbeat of the drum. Instead, they expanded it, allowing artists to create rhythms impossible to play by human hands, layering beats with mechanical consistency, inventing entirely new genres that would shape the sound of the late 20th and 21st centuries. Today, the drum exists in two worlds at once, the ancient and the modern, the primal and the digital. It still echoes in the circle of hands striking gems beneath the open sky, carrying tradition forward. But it also pulses in nightclubs and concert halls, crafted from samples and sequences, moving crowds with rhythms generated by code. Whether through jazz improvisation, the driving force of rock, or the futuristic landscapes of electronic music, the drum continues to evolve without ever losing its essence. It remains what it has always been: the sound of human connection, the heartbeat of culture, the rhythm that ties us to both our ancestors and our future. Through all these transformations, one truth has never changed. Rhythm is the thread that ties humanity together across time, space, and culture, a language older than speech and yet as alive today as it was in the first heartbeat felt by ancient peoples around their fires. It is remarkable to think that when a drummer pounds out a groove on a modern stage, or when a DJ layers beats in a crowded club, they are echoing the same primal impulse that moved shamans to strike their drums in darkened caves or guided warriors to march in unison thousands of years ago. Rhythm has always been more than sound. It is movement, emotion, memory, and connection all woven into one. It speaks to the body in ways words cannot, synchronizing our breath, quickening our pulse, and stirring something deep within that makes us want to move together. Even across different eras and continents, when people hear a steady beat, they instinctively join in, clapping, dancing, or simply swaying. And in that shared response lies a reminder that we are bound by a rhythm that belongs to no single culture but to humanity itself. Consider how, in one corner of the world, African drummers use polyrhythms to weave intricate layers of sound, while in another, Native American tribes circle around great drums to honor the earth and ancestors. And in yet another, Japanese taiko players strike with thunderous precision, channeling both discipline and spirit. Each tradition seems unique, yet at its core it reveals the same human truth. Rhythm creates unity. It allows individuals to lose themselves in something larger, dissolving boundaries of self, culture, and time. This is why rhythm resurfaces again and again at life's most important moments: births, weddings, harvests, battles, and farewells, because it carries people together into shared experience, making the invisible bonds between us feel tangible. What is extraordinary is that rhythm does not fade with the passing of centuries, but continues to reinvent itself while remaining the same heartbeat it has always been. When crowds cheer at a rock concert, when dancers lose themselves in the rhythm of salsa, when monks chant in cadence, or when digital beats ripple through headphones on a busy subway, they are all participating in the same ancient dialogue, responding to vibrations that transcend words. Rhythm is proof that while civilizations may rise and fall, technologies may change, and languages may vanish, there remains a pulse that is eternal, one that outlives kings, dynasties, even empires. It is the sound of humanity reminding itself that, despite all divisions, there has always been something that connects us, an unbroken rhythm that bridges the past, the present, and whatever future awaits. As humanity moved forward from the timeless pulse of rhythm and the unity it created, another rhythm began to take shape, not one of drums and chants, but of steel beams rising skyward, hammers striking in unison, and cities transforming into vertical landscapes. Nowhere was this new rhythm more visible than in Manhattan during the 19th century, where the modern world began to discover that progress could be measured not just by distance across land, but by how high civilization could reach toward the clouds. The stage for this transformation was set by a seemingly simple but revolutionary invention, the safety elevator created by Elisha Otis. Before his breakthrough, the idea of buildings stretching dozens of floors into the air was unthinkable, for no one would risk ascending such heights when a snapped rope could mean instant disaster. Yet with the introduction of Otis' ingenious mechanism that locked the platform in place even if the cable failed, a new era was born, and vertical expansion became not only possible but inevitable. Manhattan, already bursting with energy, ambition, and limited ground space, embraced this innovation with a fervor that seemed almost unstoppable. As waves of immigrants poured into New York, bringing their labor, dreams, and resilience, the city faced a problem that was both simple and monumental. There was no more room to spread outward. The only solution was to build upward, and the skyline began to transform into a jagged forest of steel and stone. The elevator was not merely a machine that lifted people. It was a key that unlocked the sky, allowing architects and visionaries to reimagine what a city could be. Each rising tower became a symbol not just of engineering brilliance, but of human determination to push beyond limits, to conquer space itself in ways as bold as any empire of the past. Walking the streets of Manhattan during this time, one would have felt the ground tremble with the sounds of construction, as ironworkers balanced on beams hundreds of feet above, their silhouettes etched against the open sky, their work shaping a future city that seemed more like a dream than reality. From the crowded tenements below, where families lived side by side in narrow quarters, people would look upward and see monuments of ambition being born before their very eyes. It was as if the city itself had decided to defy gravity, and Otis' elevator became the heartbeat of this new world, carrying office workers, businessmen, and eventually ordinary citizens to heights their ancestors could scarcely have imagined. The rise of skyscrapers was more than architecture, it was a declaration of a new age, where humanity refused to be confined by nature's limits and instead found ways to reshape the horizon itself. And at the heart of it all, the invention of one man had become the catalyst for a revolution that changed not just Manhattan, but the very identity of modern cities across the world. As the elevator unlocked the skies and Manhattan discovered its destiny as a city that thrived vertically, ambition quickly transformed into rivalry, and soon the streets below became the stage for a towering competition that reshaped the skyline into a battlefield of steel and stone. The question was no longer whether New York could build tall, But who would build tallest? And each new structure seemed determined to claim the heavens as its own. This skyscraper race began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when architectural marvels rose one after another, each declaring itself the pinnacle of human achievement, only to be surpassed within a few short years by the next bold challenger. The Park Row building, completed in 1899, was among the first to wear the crown, rising majestically above its neighbors at 391 feet, a true colossus in its time. Its towering presence symbolized not just business success, but also the dawning of a new identity for Manhattan, a city that no longer defined itself by its streets or bridges, but by the upward sweep of its skyline. Yet even as people marveled at Park Row's dominance, whispers spread that it was only the beginning, that the competition for the sky had only just begun. Those whispers proved true in 1908, when the Singer Building soared to an astonishing 612 feet. For a moment, it seemed to defy the very limits of architecture, its slender tower piercing the clouds with a grace that left passers-by awestruck. The Singer Building embodied elegance and progress, a symbol of American ingenuity and corporate ambition. But like all champions in a relentless race, its reign was brief, for the hunger to build higher could not be contained. By 1930, the city witnessed the rise of the Chrysler Building, a gleaming masterpiece that seemed less like a building and more like a sculpture of light and steel. Its Art Deco crown, shimmering with metal arches and triangular windows, captured the imagination of the world, and for a fleeting moment gave it the title of the tallest building on Earth. Yet even as the spire of Chrysler reached skyward, the steel skeleton of another giant was already being assembled only blocks away, one destined to cast even longer shadows across Manhattan. That giant was the Empire State Building, a project of unimaginable scale. Completed in 1931, during the depths of the Great Depression. At 1,454 feet with its antenna, it rose so far above its competitors that for decades it remained unmatched, earning the nickname the Empty State Building in its early years because its vast number of offices stood unoccupied during the economic downturn. But time transformed it into the ultimate symbol of New York's defiance. A tower that declared to the world that even in hardship, the city would reach higher than anyone thought possible. Together, these buildings were not merely structures but chapters in a story of ambition, rivalry, and resilience. They told of a city that refused to rest, where every generation sought to carve its name into the skyline, each tower a proclamation that progress had no ceiling. The skyscraper race was more than engineering, it was poetry written in glass and steel, a vertical saga that transformed Manhattan into a monument to human aspiration. As the Empire State Building stood as a monument of ambition and defiance, the story of Manhattan's skyline did not stop with Art Deco spires gleaming against the sun. For soon a new wave of visionaries arrived with a radically different philosophy, one that stripped away ornament and sought purity in line, proportion, and glass. This was the age of the international style, a movement born in Europe but perfected in the booming corporate heart of New York, where companies longed to display not just their wealth, but also their discipline, efficiency, and global reach. If the earlier towers had been like jeweled crowns, dazzling with detail and personality, these new skyscrapers were sharpened blades, clean and minimal, their very restraint becoming a new kind of power. The shift began in the mid-20th century, when architects like Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius inspired a generation to believe that beauty lay not in decoration but in clarity. And in Manhattan, their ideas found fertile ground. Rising from the avenues came steel and glass boxes that rejected the flamboyant curves and ornamented facades of earlier decades, embracing instead an austere rhythm that spoke of order and strength. Each facade was like a disciplined grid, each reflective surface a mirror to the city around it. And together they gave New York a new architectural language, one that was corporate, international, and ruthlessly modern. The Seagram Building on Park Avenue, completed in 1958 under the guidance of Mies and Philip Johnson, became the archetype of this philosophy. Its bronze-tinted glass and steel frame shimmered with a quiet authority, and the deliberate simplicity of its form was its genius. It was not trying to shout above the city like the Chrysler or Empire State. Instead, it whispered of power, stability, and permanence. A message perfectly suited to the corporate giants that now define the economic life of the city. Soon, others followed, and Manhattan's skyline filled with clean-cut towers that projected efficiency in every line, each one a monument not to individual imagination but to the collective discipline of a new business age. These towers, rising in disciplined ranks, created an entirely new atmosphere in the city. Walking through the canyon streets beneath them, one felt not the exuberance of a metropolis still dreaming of limitless heights, but the controlled confidence of a city that had already achieved its power and was now determined to hold it. The international style was not about reaching higher than one's rivals. It was about projecting an image of strength, stability, and authority that could be recognized across continents. In their simplicity lay their message. Manhattan had matured, and its skyline was now the headquarters of a global order. Yet even as the disciplined grids of the international style redefined Manhattan's avenues, the city soon turned its gaze to an even grander vision, one that would dwarf even the proudest towers of the past and proclaim New York not merely as the financial capital of America, but as the beating heart of an interconnected world. This vision took shape in the World Trade Center, a project born in the 1960s and realized in the twin forms of two immense towers that seemed to rise without end, their sheer faces of glass and steel reflecting the sky itself, as if humanity had finally mastered the horizon. Designed by Minoru Yamasaki, the twin towers were not only feats of engineering but also symbols of an era that believed commerce could knit together nations, and that the exchange of goods and ideas might serve as a path toward unity. When the towers opened in the early 1970s, they instantly transformed the city's skyline. From the Hudson River they stood like colossal gateways, welcoming ships and planes into the harbor, while from the bustling streets of Lower Manhattan they seemed impossibly vast, their scale both intimidating and inspiring. For many, they embodied the confidence of a globalizing age, an age when the promise of international trade was imagined as a bridge between cultures and a guarantee of prosperity. Tourists marveled at the observation decks where, clear days, one could see the curve of the earth itself, and workers in their thousands poured in and out each morning, carrying with them the rhythm of a world that pulsed through the veins of these towers. But time, as it often does, layered new meanings onto their steel frames. For decades, the World Trade Center stood as a symbol of optimism, its height a statement of human collaboration, yet in an instant it became a symbol of unimaginable tragedy, a wound not only to a city but to the spirit of humanity. The towers, once beacons of unity, fell, and with them the certainty of an age collapsed into dust and silence. What had been built as monuments of connection now carried the weight of loss, and the skyline itself bore the scar of their absence. And yet, New York is a city that has always risen from its own ashes, a place where destruction has never been the end of the story, but rather the beginning of renewal. In the years that followed, the site became not a void but a sanctuary, where memory and resilience intertwined. The memorial fountains, set in the footprints of the towers, offered a space of reflection where water flowed endlessly into the earth, reminding all who came that even in the darkest chapters, life continues its course. Above them, One World Trade Center rose, gleaming with defiance and dignity, its spire reaching higher than any tower before it in the city, proclaiming not just the power of commerce but the resilience of the human spirit. Thus, the World Trade Center came to embody all the paradoxes of modern history: triumph and devastation, vulnerability and endurance, memory and renewal. To look upon it was to see not just architecture, but the narrative of a city and a world that had endured heartbreak yet chosen to rebuild. And in this way, Manhattan's skyline, once more transformed, became not merely a collection of towers, but a testament to the unbroken will of humanity to rise again, no matter the fall. The story of Manhattan's skyline did not end in grief, nor was it frozen in the moment of loss. For the very spirit of New York has always been one of transformation, and out of tragedy there emerged not silence, but a renewed determination to build, to dream, and to rise again. In the years that followed the fall of the Twin Towers, the city became a living testament to resilience. As architects, engineers, and ordinary citizens alike came together to imagine not only how to heal a wound, but how to shape a future that would honor the past while embracing the possibilities of tomorrow. The rebuilding of Lower Manhattan was not undertaken as an act of replacement, but as a gesture of evolution, an acknowledgement that while the skyline had been scarred, it would now carry a deeper story, one etched into its very foundations. One World Trade Center, gleaming with glass that catches the light of every sunrise, became more than just a skyscraper. It became a beacon, its spire reaching higher than any before it in the city, standing not as a monument of loss, but as a declaration that even when struck down, New York would rise stronger, brighter, and bolder. Around it, the memorial pools reflected endless skies, offering a place where memory and renewal could coexist, where the sound of cascading water echoed the voices of resilience. The new skyline that emerged was not simply about reclaiming what had been taken, but about redefining the very essence of what Manhattan stood for: ambition without end, strength that endures, and creativity that refuses to be confined by fear. As towers such as One World Trade Center joined the ever-expanding forest of steel and glass, the city pushed upward once again, not with reckless pride but with a quiet defiance, as if to say that no force could halt its progress. The architecture of the new era revealed the maturity of a city that had endured both triumph and tragedy. It was sleeker, more sustainable, more attuned to the needs of a global age. Yet it still carried the same restless energy that had once driven the rise of the Empire State Building and the Chrysler. From the financial district to Midtown, from Hudson Yards to One Vanderbilt, the skyline began to glow with the confidence of the 21st century, its silhouette a reminder that ambition cannot be destroyed, only reshaped. And so, the post-9/11 rebuilding of New York did more than fill an absence on the map. It transformed the skyline into a living symbol of resilience, a monument to both the fragility and the strength of humanity, and a promise that no matter how deep the shadows may fall, there will always be light breaking through the glass and steel, rising higher with every new dawn. Through every chapter of this journey, from the earliest fires kept alive in the huts of medieval peasants to the vast cities aligned with the stars in Mesoamerica, from the thunder of drums echoing across continents to the steel towers piercing the skies of Manhattan, one truth rises above all else: the story of humanity is defined not only by invention and ambition but by resilience, by an unyielding will to endure even when the odds seem impossible, by a spirit that bends but never breaks. Whether it was ancient people braving winters in fragile homes, carving meaning into stone with hieroglyphs, or offering their devotion through rituals that bound their societies together, or whether it was modern builders who turned iron, glass, and concrete into monuments of progress after facing profound loss, the thread that unites them all is the determination to rise again and again, to find ways to adapt, to create beauty and meaning even in the harshest environments or darkest crises. Resilience is not a single moment, nor is it limited to one culture or age. It is a rhythm that beats through time, like the steady pulse of the first drums, guiding communities to survive, to remember, and to dream of what lies beyond the horizon. The civilizations of the past left behind temples, symbols, and ruins, each whispering that endurance itself is a kind of art, while the modern skyline of New York stands as a blazing reminder that even when the world seems shaken to its core, human hands will build anew, carrying forward memory while shaping the future. In this way, history is not a static record but a living testament to survival, creativity, and hope. From firelight to skyscraper, from ritual song to digital rhythm, the same theme emerges. Humanity, tested by time and turmoil, always finds a way not only to survive but to transcend, leaving behind stories that continue to inspire across generations. Belief systems, woven deeply into the fabric of every civilization, were not abstract philosophies reserved for priests or kings but living forces that shaped how entire communities understood the world, how they endured hardship, and how they defined survival itself. To the ancient mind, the cosmos was not distant or silent, it was alive, ordered by unseen rhythms, populated by gods whose favor or disfavor could mean the difference between abundance and famine, health and illness, safety and disaster. Every sunrise, every harvest, every storm carried meaning, and rituals became the language through which humanity spoke back to the universe. Offering devotion, asking for guidance, and reaffirming the fragile yet powerful connection between mortal lives and divine forces. These beliefs gave structure to societies, dictating when crops should be planted, when battles should be fought, when communities should gather to celebrate or to mourn, and even when great monuments should be raised toward the heavens as eternal messages to the gods. For the people of Teotihuacan, aligning temples with the stars was more than architectural precision. It was a way of placing their entire city in harmony with the universe, ensuring that human life reflected the balance of cosmic order. For Egyptians, carving hieroglyphs into stone, the act was not merely artistic but sacred, a form of communication with divine forces that outlasted generations, keeping their world in sync with eternity. Across continents, drums echoed in sacred ceremonies, not only to summon communities together but to call upon the gods themselves, binding the mortal and the divine in a single heartbeat of sound. These systems of belief, varied in their rituals yet unified in purpose, were survival strategies as much as spiritual expressions. For in a world where floods, droughts, or sudden disaster could wipe away years of labor, faith offered stability, guidance, and hope. Even in times of suffering, these belief systems told people that there was meaning in endurance, that the trials of life were part of a greater story, and that through devotion and ritual, survival was not only possible but purposeful. Innovation, in all its many forms, has always been humanity's way of answering the harshest questions posed by existence, a way of enduring circumstances that seemed impossible and of reaching beyond the limits set by nature or fate. When the elements raged, when hunger gnawed, when uncertainty pressed heavily on the shoulders of entire communities, people turned to their ingenuity not only through tools and structures, but also through the intangible worlds of spirit, rhythm, and vision. The act of aligning temples to the stars was not simply about building in stone, but about creating a bridge between earth and sky, an innovation of thought that transcended the confines of daily struggle and dared to situate human life within a cosmic pattern. In the same way, the steady drumbeats that once echoed through forests, deserts, and valleys were more than instruments of noise. They were technologies of connection, innovations of sound that allowed scattered groups to communicate, to gather, to summon courage, and to remember that they were never truly alone in their struggles. Even in architecture, the leap from huts of clay to soaring monuments of stone or glass was more than an evolution of engineering. It was the manifestation of a shared will to endure, to resist the smallness of mortality, and to project human presence into the realm of the eternal. Such innovations were not born out of comfort but from necessity, and each was an answer to a pressing question: how do we survive? How do we find meaning? How do we endure together in a world that constantly tests our limits? Spiritual innovation gave rise to rituals that offered stability in the face of chaos. Rhythmic innovation provided unity and courage when fear threatened to fragment communities. And architectural innovation reshaped landscapes into testaments of ambition and resilience. At their core, these breakthroughs were not merely about solving problems, they were about transcending them, about proving that while nature may impose boundaries, human imagination could redraw them. In every age, whether in the shadow of pyramids, under the pulse of ancient drums, or among the glittering steel of modern skylines, innovation stood as the language through which humanity declared its refusal to be defined by limitation and its determination to rise beyond. As we look back across the vast sweep of history, a pattern emerges that is far more than a collection of events, rituals, inventions, and towering monuments. It is a story of persistence, of people who faced harsh environments, endless uncertainty, and moments of overwhelming crisis, yet found within themselves the power to adapt, to create, and to carry meaning into the future. From the stones of ancient temples to the steel beams of modern skyscrapers, from the beating of the first hand-made drum to the digital rhythms that now echo through speakers around the world, humanity has always sought ways to endure and beyond endurance, To transcend, consider the temple builders of Teotihuacan, who aligned their structures to the cosmos with a precision that still astonishes us today. They believed that by shaping stone in harmony with the stars, they were securing a place not only on Earth, but within the order of the universe itself. Their sacrifices and ceremonies were not merely acts of ritual, but innovations in meaning-making. Attempts to weave human life into a pattern that felt larger, eternal, and unshakable. Then think of the drummers who, long before written language, carried messages across valleys and mountains, or who in moments of fear and uncertainty united whole communities through rhythm. For them, the drum was more than an instrument. It was a lifeline, a pulse that reminded them that they belonged to something greater than themselves. Fast forward centuries, and we see the rise of skyscrapers piercing the sky over Manhattan. These structures were more than engineering marvels. They were statements of ambition, a declaration that humanity would not be bound by the limits of the ground beneath their feet. Each building represented more than steel and stone. It was a vision made real, proof that communities and individuals could dream upwards and make that dream visible to the entire world. When tragedy struck and those towers fell, the act of rebuilding was not only about restoring what was lost, but also about reaffirming resilience, about reminding ourselves that even in the darkest times, we can rise again, higher and stronger, carrying memory and hope together. Across these stories, what unites them is not simply survival, but the refusal to let survival be the only goal. Human beings have always sought meaning, beauty, and transcendence, even in the harshest circumstances. Belief systems gave structure when the world seemed chaotic. Rituals offered connection when fear threatened to divide. Rhythms reminded us of unity when silence felt unbearable. And innovations in building and design allowed us to imagine futures beyond what our eyes could see. Every age found its own tools, its own symbols, its own ways of declaring, "We are here. We matter. We will continue." And so, when we step back, we see that the story of humanity is not only written in stones, drums, or skyscrapers. It is written in the determination to connect, to create, and to carry hope forward even when the future seems uncertain. The determination has carried us from caves to cities, from whispered prayers to global networks, from flickering fires to lights that can be seen from space. It has always been there, guiding us, reminding us that though we may be fragile, together we are capable of astonishing resilience and beauty. Tonight, as you let these stories settle in your mind, remember that you are part of this same long journey. The same heartbeat that once echoed in ancient drums echoes in you. The same imagination that once aligned temples with the stars now dreams through your thoughts. The same resilience that rebuilt skylines after tragedy continues quietly in the choices you make each day. You are not separate from history, you are its continuation, its living breath, its unbroken rhythm. So let your heart rest with that knowledge. Feel the weight of time not as a burden, but as a blanket, woven with the efforts of countless lives before you, each one adding to the fabric of resilience, faith, rhythm, and vision. And as the night surrounds you, may you feel comforted in knowing that no matter the challenges ahead, humanity has always found ways to endure and transcend, and you are part of that endless, beautiful story. Good night, and may your dreams be gentle,